I'm going to call a meeting to order. Sorry we're a little late. We had kind of a late vote, but welcome to meeting number 22, the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, October the 16th, 2007, Bill C-327, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act, reduction of violence in television broadcasts. I welcome our witnesses this afternoon from the Canadian Teachers Federation, Emily Noble and Miles Ellis, and from Media Action, Sherry Graydon. Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to ask the Canadian Teachers Federation to give your first presentation. Try to keep it to 10 minutes. You each have 10 minutes for presentation, like each group, and then we'll go to questions. So, okay, go ahead, sir. Or ma'am.
Thank you very much. The Canadian Teachers Federation, CTF, is the national voice for teachers in Canada on education and related social issues. Our membership includes teacher organizations in every province and territory, representing 220,000 teachers across the country. We appreciate the opportunity to present this submission to the Standing Committee Canadian Heritage as it debates Bill C-327, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act. Next to parents, who in fact best understand the impact that media violence has on our young, teachers often stand as witness to the physical and the psychological fallout from media violence. With your permission, we will speak to what we know and to what we see that is needed. We will speak to more than just media violence by way of TV. We will speak to our concerns about bullying and violence that has the potential to or does directly affect our students, our schools and teachers through all entertainment and communications media. What we know. On November 19, 2003, we released the results of a landmark national survey of 5,756 students in grades 3 to 10, and these would be 8 to 15-year-olds, titled Kids Take On Media. This survey was made possible by a Government of Canada grant through the Department of Justice's National Crime Prevention Centre. And among results were the following. 48% of Canadian kids aged 8 to 15 have their own TV, and this was in 2003, and 35% have their own VCR. 75% of the kids in grades 7 to 10 watch restricted movies at home. In grade 7, 25% of children have personally rented an R-rated video. And 60% of boys in grades 3 to 6 play video and computer games almost every day. One of the top choices for both Francophone and Anglophone boys in grades 3 to 6, and this would be 8 to 11-year-olds, is Grand Theft Auto, an ultra-violent action game aimed at mature audiences which involves murder, bludgeoning, and prostitution. In grades 3 to 6, roughly 30% of kids claim that they have never had any adult input about what TV shows they can watch, and by grade 6, it rises to 50%, and by grade 8, it is 60%. With game playing, adult involvement is as follows. In grades 3 to 4, the top figure for parental involvement never rises above 50%. By grade 7, 75% of adults never tell children what video or computer games they can or cannot play. Another finding was 51% of kids in grades 7 to 10 stated that they had witnessed imitation or some violent act from a movie or TV show. Violent acts can include imitating a dangerous stunt. It does not necessarily mean aggressive violence directed against another person. Some of the most important findings. The Kids Take On Media show studies that kids and adolescents whose parents supervise their TV viewing and who discuss violence, racism, and sexism in the media are more likely to be aware of the negative impact of media violence. Many children, however, are on their own. In response to this survey, the Canadian Teachers Federation, with partners like Media Awareness Network, the Canadian School Boards Association, the Canadian Home School Association, developed a tips bulletin for parents and a teacher study activity guide. Some of the other findings and more recent data from teachers we see in the following poll 2005, the Canadian Teacher Federation National Teachers Poll. 78% of teachers reported witnessing a student physically assaulting, intimidating another student. 75% of teachers reported witnessing a student verbally abusing another student. In 2006, the Canadian Teacher Federation National Issues in Education poll, the public was asked what they consider as serious problems in community schools. And tied for first as most serious was bullying and violence. 76% said very or somewhat serious, and 44% said very serious. In November 2007, in a release of the most comprehensive survey of teachers ever conducted in Canada, titled School Teachers in Canada, Content, Profile and Work, the following was found. In response to the question, to what extent do the following hinder the accomplishment of your duties when considering serious or various school concerns, the second highest response of teachers, 51%, was intimidation or bullying among students. Now we come to the most recent form of threat and potential violence by way of communications media, one that we have targeted as a major component of this whole issue, and that is cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is described as the use of information and communication technologies such as email, cell phone, pager text messages, instant messaging, and websites to support deliberately repeated and hostile behaviors that is intended to harm others. And that was a definition by Bill Belsey, teacher, founder of bullying.org. Kathy Wing of the Media Awareness Network we call it an online culture of cruelty. This is an issue closely linked to violence in television broadcasting, as many of the same assumptions on context and outcomes are relevant in promoting an ambivalence towards the use of violence in our daily lives. In July 2007, at the Canadian Teacher Federation annual general meeting in Toronto, a mandate was given to our organization to address the rapidly emerging issue. And what do we know about it? In an extensive study of Canadian youth conducted between 2003, 2005 by the Media Awareness Network entitled Young Canadians in a Wired World, 5,200 children grades 4 through to 11 found 94% go online at home, 86% have their own email accounts, 89% of grade 4 students play games online, 34% of students in grades 7 to 11 report being bullied, while 2% of those reported talk about severely being harmed. 59% report assuming another identity on the Internet, and of those, 17 say that they pretended to be someone else because I can act mean to people and not get into trouble. The most recent survey on the topic, initial findings released February 2008, involved 2,000 students in Toronto, grades 6 and 7 and grades 10 and 11, was conducted by Associate Professor Faye Mishna from the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto, and the findings include the following. 21% reported being cyberbullied, 35% reported cyberbullying others, 46% have a computer in their bedroom, 33% have given a password to a friend, 28% have watched someone else being bullied online, and 67% of parents don't supervise Internet use. Finally, results from the most recent Canadian Teacher Federation National Issues in Education poll conducted in February of 2008 reveals that 85% of the public are familiar with the term cyberbullying. 34% indicate that they were aware of students in their community school being cyberbullied. 91% believe that parents should become knowledgeable and responsible in monitoring their children's activities with the Internet and electronic communication devices. 71% believe that the development of legislation that better protects students and teachers from cyberbullying would be somewhat or very effective in preventing cyberbullying. 56% believe holding Internet service providers and wireless telephone providers accountable if their services are used for cyberbullying would be somewhat or very effective. 70% believe school boards should hold students accountable even if the cyberbullying originates from outside the school. We cannot ignore the obvious. It is clear that for teenagers, the web has become a virtual hangout. For instance, it was reported in Net Business News in May 2007 that in the U.S., more than 70% of girls 15 to 17 use social networking sites such as MySpace and Facebook. Our children are adopting and adapting to the new communication technology. However, with the new opportunities come new negative realities. Cyberbullying combines the devastating psychological effects of both verbal and social bullying. However, the impact can be even more profound because the child who is being victimized often doesn't know who's doing the harassing, and many people can covertly witness or join in the bullying. Therefore, we're here today to speak not only to the issue of violence on TV, but to the threats, bullying, and violence through all communications media. We include in this the threat of cyberbullying. Therefore, we are here today to speak not only to the issue of violence on TV, but to cyberbullying. Bill 327 may or may not be particularly a good tool to address this issue. However, something must be done. The CTF is addressing the issue of media violence and particularly cyberbullying in two ways: using opportunities to educate the public, parents, teachers, children, school boards, and governments on the issue, and searching for ways in which the regulatory framework can further serve to protect everybody from the negative impact of violence and the inappropriate use of communication technology. If we extend these strategies to this discussion, we would recommend two things: education, funding support for continued research into bullying and violence through any media, development of resources and supports to assist students, teachers, and parents in appropriate responses to perceived and realized media threats and violence, protection, development of more appropriate classification and monitoring mechanisms on the part of federal regulatory bodies in light of the development of even more violent and reprehensible video games, amendments to the criminal code that make the law more effective of the capabilities of emerging technology, and lastly, the development of a national, international, legal, collaborative framework to address the hosting, delivery of offensive, illegal, inappropriate materials from outside our country, i.e. the inter-service providers. And thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Graydon, please.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity for appearing before you.
I'm here representing Media Action, Action Media. We are a national nonprofit organization that is dedicated to raising public awareness of the social impacts of media and to encouraging more responsible industry practice. My written brief provides more detailed information about my particular expertise as a media producer, educator, and author of media literacy books. I would like to start by saying I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and the opportunity that this bill is providing to pay attention to violence in the media. I share the concerns behind it and the concerns being expressed by the CTF. In fact, I'm currently working on a new media literacy book specifically looking at the gap between the violence we consume as entertainment and the violence that surrounds us in society, and the disconnect that young people in particular have between those two. As I hope you've already heard, there's a very significant body of research in peer-reviewed academic journals that about the impacts of media violence, which essentially comes to three conclusions, although there are invariably a variety of variables that influence how people respond to media violence. Essentially, media violence contributes to increased fear, increased aggressive behavior, and decreased sensitivity to the suffering of others. And that goes obviously not just for television violence, but for violence in all media. That's the bad news. The good news is that Canada, and I'm sure the broadcasters have told you this, Canada has a very progressive anti-violence code, broadcasting code. Unfortunately, the way the code is administered is problematic for at least three reasons. And although I respect the efforts of the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council, which administers the code, and indeed I have worked with Ron Cohen and his colleagues, The current process is complaint-driven. In other words, the onus is on consumers to know the code exists, to know what's in the code, to complain about the code, and that's how the existing code gets complied to. That's how compliance gets enforced. And necessarily, because it's complaint-driven, all of the enforcement of the code happens after the fact, after the material that breaks the code has already aired. Thirdly, the present way of administering the violence code contains, really, to my mind, absolutely no disincentives to broadcasters to air material that's in contravention of their own code. In theory, broadcasters can lose their license if they fail to comply with the violence code, in theory. In practice, this is never going to happen. It hasn't happened yet. I would suggest it's not going to. Only once in 20 years has a station come close to losing its license, and that was the process involving a Quebec City radio station, Choix, which in fact took 5 years to play out. It took also 6 years to get Howard Stern, shock jock Howard Stern, whose humor and whose programming, the very nature of his humor was fundamentally in contravention of the code, and it took 6 years for that process to play out and for Howard Stern to be removed from Canadian airwaves. So the codes exist to prevent material that's blatantly offensive to Canadians, but in practice it happens after the fact and is not, in my submission, very effective. Indeed, the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council, when they spoke with you last year, confessed that they have upheld 72% of the complaints that have come to them over the last 8 or 9 years. What penalties have been meted out to the broadcasters who were in contravention of the code? They are essentially required to write a letter to the complainant, the person who knew enough to make the complaint in the first place, and they are required to run 2 on-air apologies for having broken the code. I suggest that this is not really much of a disincentive. No doubt you have perhaps also been told that the CBSC is currently receiving fewer complaints about violence in the media than it was 10 years ago. I suggest that this is probably not evidence of more responsible or less violent programming. It is more likely due to the fact that increasing levels of violence in other media have led to greater acceptance of material on television that would have been unacceptable 10 years ago. Number 2, there is also much less public discourse about TV violence and media violence today than there was a decade ago, for a number of reasons. Number 3, because of this, Canadians are much less aware of the complaint process. Very, very few people know of the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council existence, let alone that there's a violence code, let alone what's in it. And finally, the complaint process itself happens after the fact. It takes months to play out, and it doesn't result in any meaningful penalty. As for the proposed bill, although I appreciate its attention to the issue, I regret to say I don't believe it will be effective. The CRTC is not currently set up to engage in the kind of monitoring that the bill requires. And my guess is that there are no plans to give the CRTC additional funds to undertake that monitoring. In addition, the Violence Code is supposed to prevent the airing of offensive material, not study it after the fact. So I have a better idea, one that would reduce inappropriate violence on Canadian television by more effectively enforcing the existing Violence Code. It's very simple, and it essentially works on the same principle as the Children's Advertising Code does, and I'll explain that. The Children's Advertising Code and the process involved is not, in fact, relevant to the province of Quebec, which had the foresight 30 years ago to implement a prohibition against advertising to children. However, in English-speaking Canada, we haven't been quite so smart and progressive. And when an advertiser in English Canada wishes to advertise to children under the age of 13, that advertiser must submit their commercial to the Advertising Standards Council in advance of it being broadcast. It pays a fee for the service that is then provided. The Advertising Standards Council people look at the ad, they gauge it against the code, they make sure it in fact is in adherence to the code, and then they give it approval, and only when the commercial has been approved is it subject to be airing on Canadian airwaves. My suggestion is that if we genuinely wanted to prevent inappropriate violence, gratuitous violence, the violence that is explicitly indicated in the broadcaster's own violence code as being inappropriate, if we genuinely want to prevent that from being aired in the first place, we should require broadcasters wishing to air violent material to submit that material in advance of the broadcast and have it adjudicated and cleared by the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council in advance, who would then say, yes, this is in compliance with the code, here is your stamp, your clearance, and now it is eligible to be broadcast. That would essentially prevent in advance the airing of inappropriate material. It would put the onus on the broadcasters themselves, not on members of the public, who typically, as I mentioned, are unaware of the process. Finally, I would encourage this committee to recommend that all media producers be required to contribute to a fund in support of media literacy programming and resources. And here I am effectively echoing the urgings of the Canadian Teachers Federation and of another witness you're going to hear after us. As the author of 2 media literacy books for young people, I spend a lot of time in schools speaking to students, speaking to teachers, and it's very clear to me that, well, in our democracy, we think of literacy as being the ability, the capacity to read and write critically. Increasingly, kids get much more information from audiovisual media than they do from the printed word. And if we don't provide them with the critical tools to be media literate, to interrogate, to challenge, to resist messages that are not in their best interests from other forms of media, we're essentially abdicating responsibility to the media producers themselves. And I'm sure you all know from your own media consumption the lessons and the learning outcomes that are being visited upon us through commercial media are not parent or ministry approved. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Okay. Thank you for that. Our first question comes from Mr. Scott today, please.
Thank you very much. I want to go first to Ms. Graydon, just because of the idea that she's proposed. So you're taking the position that the capacity to measure appropriateness of violence is as they're trying to get to in this bill exists, but it's being applied after the fact. So who would be the determinant of the interpretation of those measurements, so that?
Well, currently the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council, if a complaint is made, the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council has panels of citizens and broadcasters who get together. When a complaint's made, they review the material that's being complained about, and they adjudicate it against the violence code, which is fairly explicit and detailed about what's defensible and what's not, and they make a ruling based on that. So that's currently happening, and so the CBSC is equipped to do that, but they're doing it on a volunteer after-the-fact basis, and I'm suggesting.
Any idea of volumes that we're talking about?
I couldn't answer that. The CBSC probably could, and right now they're only adjudicating material that's complained about. I would suggest that there's all sorts of other material that would fall under the...
Could you consider a regime that, where there was a consequence, even after the fact, that would have a prohibitive impact on production? So it was proposed, for instance, that I think the CRTC proposed the possibility of administrative monetary penalties. I think the reference they used would be a system of fines, I guess, such that the finding that now requires an apology, if there was some larger consequence, they were, I guess, making the case that the space between an apology and the canceled license is perhaps a little large. And therefore, if there's something in the middle, I think that's the, how do you respond to that?
Certainly, I think fines would have a more of a deterrent factor than currently the apology does. What I'm proposing, though, is that money gets spent up front, and that would, in fact, prevent the material from being on in the first place.
To the Teachers Federation, I'm curious about the familiarity of the present system. And first of all, I didn't really gather from your intervention your position on the bill, particularly. Perhaps you can.
Our position on the bill is the bill may, in some format, have an impact on it, but we see it as a larger problem. It's only a piece of a greater puzzle that we're concerned about. And for example, when you talk about TV programs, many of them now that kids watch, they access them through the internet. They access things like YouTube. And what we know from in conversation with teacher organizations all over the world, one of the greatest concerns they have is the degree to which they're able to get at the internet service providers who are the host the platforms and servers where, you know, social networking sites, programs like YouTube, where how do you get at them to get the kind of cooperation that you need, or have laws, be they national or international, that can get at inappropriate materials in any media form coming to our children. I mean, when you see the stats that we talked about, we just heard of in the last days, actually, you know, half the students have VCRs or computers in their room now in Toronto in the most recent survey, and 75% of parents don't monitor what they watch. So
I took the point that, and I think everybody has talked about the fact that we're talking about a very small part of the information or entertainment information that would be available, and that we need to do something else, which then lends itself to something more proactive that could be broader. And I think, and I'm now back to the teachers, I think something that would enable, I think really at the end of the day, we're going to have to figure out some way to enable young people to simply be more discerning, because I think it's coming. I think it's coming. It's not going to get less. And we're going to have to equip kids to be able to deal with what's coming, rather than feel somehow we can protect them. I mean, we have to do everything we can to make sure that the inputs are as civilized as we can make them. That's not too subjective a term. But at the same time, I think that we've got to recognize that our efforts may be overwhelmed by the incoming.
I couldn't agree more. What we've done, and we've been, this is part of an overall strategy of what we're doing as an organization to take on the issue. First of all, with regards to the Kids Take On Media, which was about TV, which was done, we have copies of this here if anyone is interested. We're prepared to, it has a teacher's guide, it has a guide for parents. So when we talk about the strategies that we're recommending and that we're doing right now, they're two-pronged, and one is education, and you're right on the mark, is that the idea of the internet being a virtual playground for our kids is absolutely correct. They are taking on, utilizing the new technologies far more than we ever would have imagined, and education has to be a major component of it for students and for parents.
Have either of you ever lodged a complaint?
Mr. Scott?
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. Right.
Have either of you ever lodged a complaint? Either?
I can speak to that. I was president of the Elementary Teachers Federation for 5 years, and under that, while we didn't lodge complaints, what we would do is write to express our concern about certain advertisements on TV, and we will continue to continue to do that. But one of the comments you made is the proactive, and I think that's key, and that's why, you know, Sherry Graydon is an expert in this whole area, and certainly the comments that she's making in terms of media literacy, we're totally, that's where we need to go, at least one component.
Ms. Morani, please.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank you for giving your presentations. I must say I'm very happy to have heard you because you have a very grounded analysis which contains a number of solutions, and something I have yet to have heard up to now. I'm also pleased to hear you because what I'm hearing is that everything is not fine. And since the start of this study, we've been told that everything is just fine. And what I understand is that no, that's not the case. A number of interesting points were raised, namely with regard to the Internet, because we've also been told that you can't control the Internet. There's nothing to do with the Internet. But I see, Ms. Noble, you said that amendments could be made to the criminal code, perhaps, and different ways of using the regulatory code and adopt a national code. So you have solutions beside raising parents' awareness, which is something I'm sure which is already being done currently. So I would like to address the state's responsibility and the responsibility of organizations. I don't want to address parental responsibility because I'm sure that that's already being done, and namely in Quebec. In your view, with regard to the Internet, and briefly, because I would also like to speak with Ms. Graydon, with regard to the Internet, do you believe that the CRTC has a role to play with regard to regulating the Internet? Whether it be dealing with service providers. So is there something to do with those people and to have a certain level of regulation with regard to Internet content?
Some regulatory body, be it the CRTC or something else, needs to be there to play a role with that, in our opinion. The second part of what we were talking about as a strategy was a protection strategy, and that has to do with the whole area of protection and regulation that you're referring to. The education piece is for the parents and the students and so on. But the regulatory piece, what we're saying, starting at the criminal code, we've met with the Parliamentary Secretary, Rob Moore from Justice. We've put out a question for our contacts around media across Canada and our teacher organizations saying, what recommendations do you have for the criminal code? We want to meet with the regulatory authority to look at gaming. You've probably heard about us asking for the boycott of the video game Bully that's just come out in this past week. So that video game, for instance, is rated as teen. That means that 13-year-olds can view it. We brought in a focus group to look at that game, and a 16-year-old boy said, I would not want my 14-year-old brother to play this game. So we want to look at that regulatory body and see what they can do better to provide more guidance around gaming. We are asking provincial bodies with regards to ministries of education to look at the School Act to offer more protection through that regulatory format right down to the school level. If the CRTC or a body like that can play a role with regards to having more opportunity to intervene with international internet service providers, then we would be supportive of that, absolutely.
Niveau international.
Oh yes, and we also have a partnership with the RCMP, looking for ways to work with them, developing curriculum that they can go into schools with and talk to schools about cyberbullying. So.
Est-ce que vous pensez aussi rapidement?
Briefly, do you also think that within the criminal code we should include an amendment whereby every ISP has the obligation to give the IP address to the RCMP once an individual has been identified, where in the case of people consuming child pornography? Because up to date, it's up to the ISP providers to do so.
When it comes to child protection, if that would be something, I was supposed to attend a meeting at the invitation of the RCMP with ISP providers in Halifax about a month ago, and I couldn't attend because Halifax was fogged in. unfortunately. But the intent of that meeting is that the RCMP wanted to speak with ISP providers and saying, we need to do something. We need to look at something. We need to find a way to work better together so that we don't have to get a subpoena every time that we want to access your material because of threats to children and so on. So if there are things that can be done to amend the criminal code, to bring it more in line with the new technologies that offers protection to children, then we would have to be very interested in seeing that happen.
Much for that. Yep, time's up. Mr. 6A, you're going to have 2 minutes left for the next round. Mr. 6A, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for coming today. I wanted to ask the folks from the Teachers Federation, in some of the material that you folks produced that accompanied the release of your study, Kids Take on Media, there was some discussion about censorship and the place of censorship in this in dealing with the whole problem of violence and media violence. And one of the articles that's on your website quotes Marjorie Hines, the author of Not in Front of the Children, which and she makes the point that censorship has a number of problems, that sometimes it actually defeats the purpose of placing limits, that it actually makes the material more attractive to young people, and it also, censorship doesn't teach kids what's inappropriate about the material that's been censored. Is that an issue for teachers as you approach this whole issue? And does that issue call into question regulation as a way of solving the problem?
It's absolutely it's an issue for us. We are very concerned when we raise attention to things or shed light on things. We are very aware that we don't want to be seen as being something that would be restrictive on freedom of speech, freedom of expression, so on and so forth. And we very much recognize and understand early in the piece with this, we knew that just by trying to be censorious, using censorship, was not going to solve the problem or address the issue. What's more important to us is to find ways to assist, help parents and teachers and students to come to grips with the new media technologies, and as Ms. Graydon so eloquently stated, is find ways through a media awareness model for kids to learn how to recognize what's inappropriate and how to prepare themselves and defend themselves.
Now, is part of the issue parents' education, though? I mean,
Yes,
I don't think we want to blame parents for the problem, but it seems to me that it's not just a media awareness, media literacy issue for children, but also for parents. But it seems to me that's the place that's not getting much attention at all. Or is there any improvement being made in parents' media literacy in any of your experience?
Well, just the news out today in the Ottawa Citizen is something that, is very sobering for us. And that is a recent study out of Montreal shows that teenage boys, up to 60% of them spend 42 hours a week now watching TV or playing video games. And there's numbers in there with regards to the percentage of them that watch it without scrutiny of adults. So that's concerning to us. It is an issue. So part of what we would recommend is support for groups, associations that engage in research and the providing of resources that will raise more attention for parents, provide more assistance and guidance for parents as to how they can play a more hands-on role with their children.
Do we have a sense that parents are playing less of a role? Like, and do we have any sense of why that would be, Ms. Graydon?
Absolutely. I think parents are less actively involved in mediating their kids' consumption of media, in part because of the explosion of sources. The very fact that, as the CTF study found, 50% of Canadian kids had televisions in their bedroom, there's something shocking and unfortunate about that. And I think that reflects a level of ignorance on parents' part about what's available on television and about the way teens and children, brains, the cognitive wiring, which increasingly we're discovering is not sophisticated enough in the way that adults' brains are. So clearly adults are not as savvy about mediating kids' media consumption as they ought to be.
In your proposals, Ms. Graydon, you talk about the sort of pre-screening process. I don't know how you describe it quickly, but some people might say that that sounds like a censorship board and that something would have to be submitted to the censors before it could go on air. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I think that's an unfair characterization for a couple of reasons. First of all, the broadcasters themselves a decade ago acknowledged that there was a problem with regards to TV violence. That's why they developed the code in the first place. So they have supported the development of the code. The conditions in the code are ones that they have articulated as being fair and appropriate in the context of a society where we're all affected by television violence. So if there's censorship going on, it's willingly, I mean, we have forms of censorship in society for obvious reasons. Journalists, for example, do not typically report on teen suicide because they know the likelihood of imitation is very high. That's a form of self-censorship that has the interests of the larger society at heart. And I think that the violence code fits in that tradition.
Now, in your proposal, you draw an example from the Advertising Standards Council around children's advertising. Are you proposing that the kind of pre-screening that you're talking about would be for all programming or just children's programming?
I'm suggesting that any programming that contains a significant amount of violence that could potentially fall on one side or the other of the violence code guidelines be subjected to that kind of pre-screening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we turn to Mr. Abbott, please.
Witnesses, thank you very much for being here today. I wonder if we can cut to the chase on this bill specifically, because that is, excuse me.
J'aurais une demande d'information.
I have a point of clarification to ask. A point of clarification, please, Mr. Chair. The clerk said that Mr. Caron would not be in attendance today. That means that one witness will not be with us here this afternoon. Would it be possible to have 3 rounds with these witnesses, given that Mr. Caron won't be here?
We have 2 rounds, and the next round will be 2 minutes. 2 minutes each person, or thereabout. We do have bells at, it's my understanding, at 5:15 or 5:30. Okay, the bells aren't till 5:30. I'll give you 3 minutes then the next round. Okay. Okay, Mr. Abbott.
Thank you. The exclusive purpose of this meeting, which is not your responsibility, it's our responsibility as members of Parliament, is to deal with the content and the advisability, the desirability, and take information from you with respect to this private member's bill. So I'd like to dispose of that right off the bat. If I understand, and I do not want to put words in your mouth, and so I'm asking, if I characterized both of your organizations and your positions as being that this bill will not be effective, I don't want to put those words in your mouth. I would like to know if you would agree with that statement, that that is your position.
Unless the government is prepared to give the CRTC considerably more money to engage in the monitoring that it's asking for, I don't think that what the bill is asking will work. And secondly, I would prefer to see that kind of energy and investment go in advance of the broadcast. So yes, I don't support this bill. I appreciate its intentions, but.
And we would support what Sherry's talking about in terms of the specificity of this bill.
Thank you. Well, that done, I mean, basically, I have the answer to the question with respect to the bill, but because I have the privilege of the time, I'd also like to, because you're experts on this, I would like to get some more information from you. With respect to cyberbullying, which, am I correct that that would probably be an internet problem, cyberbullying? You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Taking a look at internet cyberbullying, particularly interactive internet, video games and DVDs, which are not covered or touched in any way, shape or form by this bill, do we have any vague notion of an 8, 9, 10, 14-year-old boy or girl in our Canadian society, of the time that they spend in front of some kind of a screen? What would it be? 10%, 15% maximum on actual broadcast television as opposed to internet, video games, and DVDs combined?
Do you mean, if I understand your question, to be clear, are you asking, do we have numbers that have broken them out, the components, or just overall?
I'm asking for a best guess. If a 12-year-old boy spent 100 hours in front of a screen, would the screen be driven by commercial television or CBC? But we're talking over-the-air broadcasting. Or would it be driven by internet? Would it be driven by video games? Would it be driven by DVDs?
I can answer that, yes.
Thank you.
This is hot off the press today. On average, students put in 20 hours of TV time and 10 hours on the computer weekly. That's today.
Okay, now, with the 20 hours of TV time, do we have any best guess from yourselves as experts as to whether the image that is appearing on the screen is coming over the air, or if it's coming by a DVD, or it's coming from an internet program?
What we do know is, and I don't have the specific numbers, but what we know is that increasingly it's coming from over the internet. We do know that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, Ms. Graydon, I'm very interested in your proposal, and I apologize in advance because this may sound like I'm being overly critical, and I apologize in advance for it because it's not intended that way. But if we're talking about the CBSC panel taking a look at things that come to them by way of complaints, and we're talking about maybe a couple of hundred a year, versus what would it be? A couple of thousand, maybe tens of thousands of programs that they would actually have to look at. Everybody wants to run away from the word censor or censorship, but I mean, that's effectively what they're doing. They're taking a look and saying, is this suitable for broadcast? I have a very simple view of that is a form of censorship. Would you agree with me that probably if they presently have a panel of, I don't know the numbers, so let's say they have a panel of 5 people who would be engaged 20 hours a week to handle a couple of hundred complaints, versus the number of people they would have to have however many hours to handle however many thousands of hours of broadcast. It just strikes me that it might not be practical. Would you agree with that?
It might really reduce the amount of violence on television.
Well, it'd take all the people off the street.
I don't know. The short answer is your point is well taken, and I have no idea what the volume of violence currently on television would require in terms of that kind of advanced screening, and it might be that, practically speaking, you would have to develop a system by which a broadcaster submitted one episode of a series, or if a broadcaster had not received any complaints over a period of time, they would be released from the responsibility of doing that. I've come up with something I could tell you in 10 minutes. I suspect that if it was genuinely something there was interest in implementing, there would have to be a more sophisticated mechanism to develop it.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. And as I agreed, a 3-minute round. We start with Mr. Belanger.
Agreed, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's good to know you agree with yourself on that.
Myself,
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I made a decision and I agree with it.
It's good.
Thank you.
I don't have quite. The testimony is clear, and if I can summarize, but we've heard what I've heard anyhow from not only our witnesses today, whom I thank, but witnesses in previous sessions. Most people sympathize with the intent of the bill. Nobody agrees with the bill itself. Some people actually disagree with the bill. So unless we hear from witnesses, Mr. Chairman, that adamantly support the bill, I think I'm reaching a conclusion that we're there, that the bill in its current form is not where I want to go. My colleague has asked whether or not the witnesses, and there was a positive response to the notion of these administrative monetary penalties that the CRTC referred to. We asked, and I hope we received before the break, the proposal or suggestions from the CRTC so we can look at that, and might be something we could or not include in the bill, depending on the nature of that. So I'm quite prepared for that. So I want to reach forward, and in terms of other witnesses, if we're going to ask other witnesses, and I put forward a suggestion, and it's not, and it's a serious one. We've heard from parents directly or indirectly. Some of us are parents. We've heard from teachers. We've heard from grandparents. Some of us are grandparents around the table. And in answer to your question, Madam Noble, is who better than parents? The answer to that is obviously grandparents, with all due respect. The one group that this bill targets is the one group we haven't heard from. And I was wondering, Mr. Speaker, just to be clear, if it'd be worth our while to assemble a panel of children, of kids, those of the age group we're talking about, who actually watch TV 20 hours a week and spend 10 hours on the internet. I know some who are glued to their internet, which is their computer screen, which is also their TV, their telephone, and they multitask to an extent that I couldn't possibly ever dream of doing. So it's obviously another generation, and it might be useful to hear from them what they think of this, since we're the ones that are targeted, because obviously from what I've heard today from the Teachers Federation, 50% or more of parents don't pay attention to what their kids are doing and watching. So it's a suggestion that I hope my colleagues won't take lightly, and I'd like to hear, I'm getting some reactions here. Let's get some reactions.
Short answer, because it was a long question.
I agree.
It's been a while since I read this wonderful study that the CTF did, but it seems to me that in the study, the kids themselves indicate that they think that their parents should be more censorious, should be more engaged, and telling them that they should not or cannot watch or play certain things. Do you recall? Yes. So kids themselves recognize that they're being exposed to stuff that is beyond the pale, that is inappropriate for them to be watching. And when I speak to kids in schools, which I do a lot of, I get the same response.
And okay.
Grandparents are absolutely wonderful, but I do want to. I think that we need to work with grandparents. One of the video operators that sells video games. The largest market, of course, are young boys, or males 16 to 25 in terms of some of the video games. However, one of the other huge markets are grandparents who don't want their grandkids to be out of the loop. And when you have a grandparent buying Grand Theft Auto for a grandson that's 6 and 7 years old, we need to do some work with grandparents.
Okay, I haven't either. Thank you. Mr. Mallow.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing today. Ms. Graydon, I would like to know whether you indicated to the council, which administers the code, put forward your concerns and the amendments you would like to see brought to the code.
I should have switched to the other language because I thought I would be able to understand you completely, and I'm not sure I got your question.
Do you want me to repeat?
Channel 4? Thank you. I'm sorry.
Je voulais simplement savoir si...
I simply wanted to know whether you indicated to the council responsible for the code your concerns, your amendments which you would like to see brought to the code.
The answer is no, because I was unaware of the bill until I was invited to appear before the committee. I see that Ron Cohen from the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council, who I know and respect, is here, so I will have the opportunity to suggest to him my modifications. I can predict his response, which will probably not be enthusiastic, because he represents, the broadcasters, and I understand that. But no, I have not made this. I just had this blinding flash of brilliance in the last week.
Donc, les trois suggestions...
So the three suggestions you said you'd like to... The three amendments you said you'd like to see in the code, you said you didn't reflect on those before appearing before the committee today. So the group you represent did not come up with those suggestions before you had to deal with the current bill?
No. In fact, in previous years, when the Television Violence Code was first introduced, we did, in fact, speak then about our concerns and have since about the after-the-fact nature of the way the code is administered. We have previously expressed concerns that the process takes a very, very long time. So when Howard Stern was airing in Canada, we repeatedly participated in the complaint process and were extremely aggravated that it took so long and that it happened after the fact. So our dissatisfaction with the process has certainly been expressed previously.
Dites-moi donc, lorsque vous dites que vous voulez que tout...
Very, very, very short.
Oui. Lorsque vous dites que tous les...
When you state that all shows should be assessed prior to broadcast, does that mean that you think the classification system isn't adequate?
No, I'm just really suggesting that shows that contain a great deal of violence, violence that would come under the violence code, and many programs on television do not fall into that category, but the television programs that do contain a great deal of violence, that it is incumbent, it should be incumbent upon broadcasters to be attentive to ensuring that those shows do in fact adhere to the code in advance, that it should not be on the consumer to make that adjudication and to make the complaint.
Thank you for that. We've got Mr. Fast for the last 3-minute question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all three of you for attending today. I must commend you for your role in doing your best to protect children and educate children in this whole area of violence. One of the struggles I've had, too, with this legislation is when it first came forward in the House, I said, well, how can I vote against this? This is about reducing TV violence that our children might be exposed to. When I looked at the bill, and I think all three of you have done that as well, it's actually not about children's violence. It's a broad regulatory power to actually censor all violence on TV. Not that it would be exercised that way, but that's the way the bill is worded. But the even greater difficulty is one that I believe Ms. Graydon put her finger on. That is, it's not going to be effective. I mean, we live in a universe now that has PVRs, that has time shifting. Our kids are watching violence on the internet. And on top of that, in a 500 channel universe, kids on the West Coast can watch an 11 o'clock show on the West Coast, and there will be no restrictions on that. And so I think one of the keys is literacy, media literacy. The other one is making sure that parents are involved. It's shocking to hear the statistics that you cited about the lack of parental supervision. In our family, we made a point of making sure we knew what our kids were watching. If you could perhaps comment on how you found the bill itself, if you did review it, and perhaps the broadness of it, the vagueness of it, and the incredible power it was giving to the regulator to actually address all TV violence, not just that focused on children's viewing hours.
We did review the suggested amendments, and we found ourselves asking ourselves the question, will this do what we want it to do? Will it get at the broader areas of concerns that we have, not only about television? And we didn't see that it would. So what we're saying is, as we said in our submission, this may or may not address some of our concerns, but what we're looking at is something that's broader than that and more comprehensive than that. At the same time, we, as teachers, have to be concerned about something being overly, censorship. So we were not certain about the degree to which, how much power was the CRTC going to have? Who was going to pay for it? Where was the funding going to come from? And even if you did all that, were they going to be able to address, the much broader concerns that we had? So when we looked at it in that regard, we said, in its form, and at least what we see as intention, we can't support it right now.
Yes, I also, just to quickly sum up didn't see the bill as being practical in terms of achieving its objectives, and so I didn't support it for that reason. I would just like to add one quick thing, and that was with regards to, it sounds like perhaps the CRTC suggested a form of penalties, financial penalties, and I would just like to recommend, if in fact that is the direction that this committee or the government goes, that the financial penalties that are levied against broadcasters would go to media literacy programming.
Okay, thank you for that. I just have one comment to make, and in your presentations, when you mentioned about 50% of children or 70% have televisions in the room. When I was younger, I was always denied television by being sent to my room. I wasn't sent to my room to watch television. So I think, again, yes, as parents and as grandparents, we all should take a big look at what our children and grandchildren are watching. Thank you very much for attending. We'll recess now for about 5 minutes. Okay, thanks.
If I may, please, I just wanted to give our committee members some information. We had asked at the last meeting for the information from the CRTC. I have also received a communication from Mr. Cohen that I have advanced to your offices on this particular topic. I made sure that it has been translated, and it relates to the information that we are asking for the CRTC. So I just wanted you to be aware of that so that you can be looking for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, yes, Mr. Ellis.
Just very quickly, we do have some materials here to share that we've produced at the CTF. If anyone's interested, you're very welcome.
Great, thank you. We'll recess for 5 minutes. Okay, well, just before we ask our next witness to come forward, Mr. Chong has asked just for a minute to suggest something we may look at in the future. I'm just going to let it, it's only going to be very short, I hope, because it'll only be short. I'll make sure of that. If you could please just, because you approached at the end of the last meeting. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last week, the CBC broadcast the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame Gala. And during that broadcast, what they did was they cut out the Francophone portions of that broadcast. And what ensued was a great controversy where many people were quite upset that the CBC had done this. In particular, singer Claude Dubois voiced his strenuous objections to it. And since this is the Heritage Committee, which has oversight over the CBC, I just want to point out that the 1991 Broadcasting Act mandates that Radio-Canada and the CBC provide programming that, 3 points, that actively contributes to the flow and exchange of cultural expression. Secondly, that is in English and French, reflecting the different needs and circumstances of each official language community, including the particular needs and circumstances of English and French linguistic minorities. And 3, finally, that it contributes to shared national consciousness and identity. So I think this last third section is most relevant to this controversy, but I also think we have an opportunity here as a committee, because I sense that the study of this bill in front of us today is winding up. I think we have an opportunity as a committee to have CBC appear in front of our committee and explain to the committee how they are fulfilling that part of their mandate, in particular the part of their mandate that demands that they contribute to shared national consciousness and identity. And I think it might be an opportunity for the committee to take a look at this for 1 or 2 committee meetings. Okay, my thing is, Mr. Belanger, be very short. We're not going to get into discussion. We have a witness here today on this. I think this is something, can I ask that we think about it? Can we think about what Mr. Chong has said here? I don't want to hold the witness up any longer, and we'll deal with it at our next meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
very short.
Very quickly, I don't have a difficulty with Mr. Chong's suggestion. I just need to advise you that another committee has decided also today to look at that, the Official Languages Committee, so we may need to coordinate. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I think we should consider perhaps adding on to our next meeting, because there may be a few, as this may indeed be winding up, there are a number of other issues already on the table that we have to look at, and I would be quite prepared to add another one, where indeed the Portrait Gallery of Canada should be located, for instance. So there's an awful lot of work that we may have to do.
Now we're very short, because Mr. Mackay is patiently waiting for us down there.
Très rapidement, Monsieur le Président.
Very briefly, Mr. Chair. I share my colleague's opinion, and I'm wondering, given that the CBC is the Anglophone network, and they might explain that their audience is only open to the English side of that show, perhaps the Radio-Canada could broadcast that show and the French side of that show. So my point is a bit more specific than what you raised.
Short, please, and I'll accept it.
Thank you, Chair. I think we were all very concerned about the situation that arose over that particular broadcast. I do understand that the CBC has issued an apology that indicated that they had made an error in judgment when it came to their decisions around that. That doesn't preclude the committee from taking a look at it. I would wonder, though, if Mr. Chong shouldn't submit that as notice of motion to the committee. It seems to me that's the way other things have gotten on our agenda, and would wonder if he might consider doing that, so we could consider it at a future
That
meeting.
will be my suggestion. And so with that put aside, we've used some valuable time here that we're taking away from our witness, our next witness, as an individual, Mr. Al Mackay. And please make your presentation, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for the invitation to appear before you today. As you know, I'm not representing any particular organization, but rather participating as an interested Canadian, as a father of 3, and in spite of the hair, not a grandfather as yet, who's been intimately involved with the issue of violence in television for more than 15 years from a number of different perspectives. I've provided a brief summary of my involvement with the issue on violence in television to the clerk, and I understand that's been circulated to you, and so you can see that I have played a role in most of the major initiatives that have happened in the violence on television dossier since the early 1990s. And while now retired from the broadcast industry, I continue to be involved as a bit of an elder statesman, one who was actually there when the codes were developed, when the classification system was created, and when media literacy initiatives were first undertaken. While I do have an opinion on the proposed legislation in front of you, I see my role today more as being a resource for this committee to be available to perhaps provide some context, clarification, and increased understanding of how the broadcast industry and the regulator and the government has dealt with this in the past and continues to deal with it today. And to that end, I don't have an extensive opening statement, believing that my limited time with you is probably best served by being available to answer your questions. For example, in watching the committee's recent deliberations, I know there's confusion over the title of the broadcaster's Code on Violence on Television. Why is it called a voluntary code when in fact it's a condition of license? Well, the answer to that lies in history, because today's code is a successor to the self-regulatory violence code that was first created in 1987. That code was entitled the Voluntary Code on Television Violence, and when it was updated in 1993, the title just carried over. And furthermore, it was only when the CRTC approved the code that it stated in its public notice that adherence to this industry-developed code would be a condition of license at any upcoming license renewal hearings and for all new licensees. We just never got around to renaming it. During one of your sessions last week, there was a committee member who asked about a statement attributed to Keith Spicer, who was chair of the CRTC in the 90s, which referred to a 10-10-80 approach, with 10% being industry codes and standards, 10% technological tools such as classification systems in the V-chip, and 80% being public awareness, education, and media literacy. Now, I was there in October of 1995 when Mr. Spicer made that comment at the opening session national hearings in Hull, following regional public consultations on what should be done about violence on television. It was his firm belief there are 3 pillars to a strategy to protect children from the harmful effects of violence. One was a collaborative and a cooperative approach with all sectors in broadcasting and the cable industries and the programmers accepting the responsibilities. 2, parents had to play a role in their children's viewing and utilize the empowering technology such as the V-chip, which worked with the classification system. And 3, ongoing public awareness and media literacy was the most important element of a successful approach to dealing with the issue of violence on television. You talked with Kathy Wing of the Media Awareness Network last week, Mr. Chairman, and there was some mention about them undertaking some fresh research on questions that have been raised during your discussion. And while additional research would be very useful in expanding our knowledge base, I suggest the committee take that further. Media literacy has been clearly identified by a previous generation of this committee, as well as the CRTC, as the most critical element of the multifaceted strategy that we've put in place in this country to deal with violence on television. I firmly believe this committee should work to ensure that the Government of Canada provides secure and long-term funding to this internationally respected organization, which is doing great work for Canadians with limited financial resources. And you've heard the accolades given to the Media Awareness Network by the previous witnesses. The codes and the tools are in place, and in my view, they're working. The media literacy part of the strategy needs more support, but through more than just project funding. Mr. Chairman, the last time this committee examined the issue of violence on television was 1993, when the Standing Committee on Communications and Culture released its report, Television Violence, Fraying Our Social Fabric. Following extensive hearings in which I participated, that report put forward a number of recommendations on how the CRTC could use its regulatory authority to work with broadcasters to ensure children were protected from the harmful effects of television violence. The report did not suggest that changes to the Broadcast Act were necessary, nor did that suggestion ever arise at all the hearings conducted by the CRTC. I believe that approach was valid then and is still valid today. I believe we have a good system in place. It's one of the most comprehensive in the world and has been working well for more than 15 years. It's one where there are effective regulations and an effective regulatory mechanism system. It's a balanced system which has been built with a primary objective of protecting children and yet at the same time preserving freedom of expression. It minimizes direct government intervention or regulation of program content, which is a minefield that I think most everybody wants to avoid. And like many other jurisdictions, it makes education a cornerstone. And just before I go to questions, I'd just like to pick up on an observation made by Monsieur Barry. It was during the national hearings in Hull when Chairman Spicer noticed that there was a group of children at the back of the hearing room, and they'd been brought in by a teacher as a field trip to see how a government commission worked. And Keith had exactly the same idea that you did. And so, much to the consternation of his officials and those who were running the hearing, he just put a stop to all the proceedings with the witnesses, and he says, let's get those kids up here. And it was quite an education. And the kids were not prepared, there were no presentations or anything, and the commissioners just talked to them about what they thought about all of this. And it would be a good exercise for this committee as well, I think. So I support your approach. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my introductory remarks. I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Firstly, we go to Mr. Scarpaleggia.
Well, you've whetted our appetite. What did the kids say?
Well, it was interesting because a lot of the parents were complaining against programs like The Simpsons and everything like that. And the kids said that was their favorite show. They didn't see anything wrong with it. You know, they knew the difference between, you know, right and wrong, what was real and what was imagined. So it was they were very open and they were very, very frank. And I think that it was a refreshing change from all the vested interests who were in front of the Commission.
I'm just, I didn't have the opportunity to read about your background. Perhaps you could just briefly, in a few seconds, tell us the source of your interest in this issue.
Well, I was in broadcasting for more than 30 years. And
were you a producer? Were you
a journalist and then in management?
For a private network?
For CTV.
CTV, okay.
I was the station manager of CTV here in Ottawa in the 1980s and 90s. And as a parent, I was interested in the issue, and there were not a lot of people stepping up to the plate to get involved on behalf of the industry, and I thought it was important that whatever we do, we do it right, and so I got involved and ended up by being involved in helping write the industry code. I've appeared in front of this committee, in front of the CRTC, participated in numerous conferences, including the CM Hinks conference, which really kicked this whole thing off in the early 1990s, and also led the development of the classification system, the creation of the on-screen icons, and most recently I supervised the rollout of encoding for V-chip technology for the industry.
The on-screen icons, I'm trying to, talking about the, could you elaborate on that? I don't, they don't come to mind. I mean, every now and then you'll see, I guess, a little box that says, could you just refresh my memory as to it?
It's a black box that will appear at the top left-hand corner of your screen. It's square and there's a little bit of a maple leaf on one corner of the box, and within it we'll have the classification of the program. and it's up for about 15 seconds at the beginning of any program that has to be rated.
You know, I guess I'd like your comment on this. My understanding of the issue really is there are a couple of issues, cross-cutting issues maybe. One is that as a parent, you know, you just want to be able to sit down from time to time with your children and watch a few hours of television and know that you will not have to switch the channel all of a sudden, or that, you know, that your children won't be frightened by some violence or whatever. So what you tend to think is that, well, you know, there are certain channels I will not go to, but I will go to CTV or CBC, and I will go there between this hour and that hour, and I should be fine. So as long, in my view, as a parent, as long as I have this space that I can trust at certain times of the day, I really don't have any other problems, because I can use a V-chip, or I can reprogram my box to block out certain channels and what have you. That's when you're talking about young children. And then of course there's the issue of the age of the children. So at a certain point it's very hard for you to control all their viewing, and that's where I guess media literacy comes in. And on the topic of media literacy, is there a sense, you know, you get the sense that we're just sort of putting our finger in the hole in the dike when it comes to educating about media. It's just so overwhelming what is out there. You know, you might get the message across to an adolescent for a little while, and then you just feel that, well, the message will be maybe lost for a time anyway, because, as I say, of the omnipresence of questionable content. But do you find that these media literacy programs work? Do they have an impact? Have we been able to measure the impact? You know, for example, are they offered also, another part of the question would be, are they offered fairly broadly in all provinces, in all schools? Is it 1 hour a month? Is it 1 hour a year? Is it an intense kind of program? I can't imagine that it would be. There are so many subjects that children are learning in school, and there are so many activities.
We have to get an answer, Mr.
Okay.
Scarpellegio. We're
Absolutely.
We're over
So
time here. So I'd like Mr. McKay to answer.
There was a lot of question in there. Let me just say that you know, from the perspective of media literacy, I was a founding director of the Media Awareness Network, and a past chair. And I mean, the approach of media literacy is you know, when your child is young, you teach them the rules of the street. You teach them when they go out to the corner, they have to look both ways. They have to watch out for traffic. They're not supposed to talk to strangers. Things like that. You street-proof your child as they're growing up, so that they become safe and aware in their neighborhood. And the challenge today is to do the same thing with your children as they're growing up. And the Media Awareness Network, through its website, which has literally thousands of pages, offers all kinds of help for parents. It offers teaching materials for schools, and I know that they have teaching modules that they have been successfully marketing to some school boards. As to the extent of that, I'm not really current on it, but there are the tools there, and I think the issue of just making parents aware that they have to media-proof their kids the same way they street-proof their kids in terms of growing up in the neighborhood, because the media is so much a part of their environment.
Thank you for that. We switch now to Ms. Morani.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to you. Thank you for appearing and presenting your expertise on the issue. My question to you is, the president of the CRTC indicated that something that could be interesting to bring forward would be some forms of administrative monetary penalties. And so the CRTC considered the violence online and considered using some form of penalties. What do you think about introducing such penalties?
The one that would best answer that, and you've already heard from them. I would just make an observation as a former broadcaster who spent the better part of 25 years at a local television station. And when you're a local broadcaster, it's just not necessarily that the programs you broadcast, it's the role that you play in the community. And the suggestion is that if you are found to be in violation of the code or the rating system and you have to issue an on-air apology, that doesn't mean very much. I would argue that it means an awful lot. Broadcasters are constantly positioning themselves as being community citizens, being actively involved in their community, and to have to air an apology saying, this may be non-parliamentary language, but we screwed up. Nobody wants to do that, especially when it's followed by perhaps a promotional spot saying, watch our telethon as we try and help the cancer hospital. It's a very strong deterrent. Once you've been through having to issue an apology for making a mistake in what you've done, you don't want it to happen again. As to the monetary side, it's really for the Commission to answer that question.
Donc ça veut dire que vous êtes contre les amendes?
That means you're against such penalties.
I would say that I don't have the ability to give you an informed opinion on them. It's the Commission that has to make that decision, not me.
Ah, ok. Est-ce que, bon, tout à l'heure, Madame...
Earlier, Ms. Graydon said that the current way of administering the code is somewhat problematic. There isn't a real deterrence, and in theory, broadcasters can lose their license, but in practice, that rarely happens. I'm simply restating what she said. It took 5 years before Schwa was sanctioned. She also talked about the burden of the proof, which rests on viewers, and that this complaints-based system was dysfunctional. What do you think about that?
Well, the CRTC has been working on a complaint-based system ever since they got started, and that was viewed as the regulatory approach that was going to be the most effective for the resources that were available.
Donc c'est efficace actuellement le système.
So you're saying that the current system, complaints-based system, is effective?
From my perspective, I would say yes. And perhaps just to talk a little bit more about what Sherry mentioned earlier, is that back when, in the 90s, when we were dealing with the formation of the codes and the national hearings were being set up, the question of, well, should there be a body set up to screen all these programs before they go to air? And somebody did the mathematics, and it was in the tens of thousands of hours of programming that would have to be screened. From a practical, operational basis, it just would not work. I know, for example, that in many cases, a lot of the primetime programming that is delivered to stations only is delivered on the day of the broadcast. Because the timeline for production is so close to airtime, it's not available 3-4 weeks in advance, which you'd require if there was supposed to be pre-screening of a body by a particular body. What the broadcasters do is when they do get it in, is it is screened against the Canadian standards, because every broadcaster is responsible for what they put on the air. So there is screening related to Canadian standards. And there's all kinds of instances where edits have been made in programs and decisions have been made in programs that where the Canadian station has made changes to the shows in order for them to conform to the standards that have been agreed to in the Canadian system.
Thank you. Mr. Success.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Mackay, for being here. A couple of quick questions, given your extensive background in developing the system that's in place, and I really appreciate that you're here with us today. I'm glad you referenced the 10-10-80 because I felt rather proud of myself for finding that when I was Googling around the internet. And although I had my sense of timing of when Mr. Spicer actually made that comment was a little off and confused the witnesses that day. But and it strikes me that you've worked hard on the code part, that 10%. On the technological part, there have been stuff there, but it seems like the 80%, which was the significant piece, is the place where maybe we haven't done so well. Is that your sense of the way things are today? That the media awareness, the media literacy piece of that is the one that is the least successful of those three pieces of the three pillars?
I would say the media awareness part of the puzzle is successful as much as it has been able to do. For what the Media Awareness Network has been able to turn out with its website, and I urge all members of the committee to take a look at it. The material they've turned out, the quality of the material that's available, it's been remarkable for an organization with very small funding. But I think it's slowly being recognized across the various educational platforms that media literacy is an important thing. I think the problem that a lot of teachers find is they're being asked to do a lot of things that parents used to do, and they're trying to figure out when do I have the time to make them learn the reading, writing, and arithmetic. But I don't think the media literacy can be avoided in there. I know it's part of the curriculum in Ontario for particular grades. I'm not sure when it kicks in. I'm not an expert on that. But the more that's paid attention to it at earlier ages, the better it is for everybody.
Do you have a sense about how parents' media literacy might be improved, given your experience in the industry?
I think sometimes parents just aren't aware of the effects of particular program elements on their kids. Parents today very busy. The circumstance is that in most households, both parents are working. You're harried. You're trying to keep up to speed with everything from homework to hockey practice to ballet class. Trying to dump something else on them is a challenge. I know I've been there. I just think if there were more ways, and again it would be up to the folks at the Media Awareness Network who are the experts of this, there are all kinds of initiatives that I think they would like to pursue that would be beneficial to parents, and I mean, maybe a little pamphlet on a milk carton, something like that. But all of that takes money, that takes time, it takes organizational ability, and they just don't have the resources to do that.
Now, do broadcasters have a role to play in increasing media literacy in Canada? Do they have like in terms of using the airwaves to do that, but also in terms of funding the kind of outreach work, education work that seems to be required right now?
Broadcasters have been very good in their past support of the Media Awareness Network. There have been many instances where, in terms of ownership changes and transfers, that the benefits that flow from that transaction, the Media Awareness Network has been listed as a beneficiary, and it has been kept alive and kept going because of the support of the broadcasting community. And but I think more needs to be done, and I was very honored to be given a special award at the November CAB convention for my work in the field, and I used the opportunity to perhaps just suggest that they could do a little bit more. They could put more about the rating system on their website, and they could promote the use of the VCHIP on their website. We've been in this regime now for a number of years, and that would not be out of line with continuing their service to their community.
What is VCHIP usage like in Canada at the moment? I know you're one of the experts on the VCHIP. So.
We haven't done any surveys in a long time, so I really can't give you a good answer. I would suspect from the turnover in television sets that probably between 75 and 80% of the sets today would probably have VCHIP equipped in there. How many parents are using it, we don't know. That could be some research that the Media Awareness Network could undertake, which would be very valuable to all of us.
And you were talking with Mr. Scarpaleggia about the icons, and you mentioned that the icon is there for 15 seconds at the beginning of a program or
Yes.
whatever. Was there ever a thought that on programs that did have violence or adult kind of programming that the icon should remain there throughout the whole program? I know the broadcasters' icons tend to stay on the screen the whole time now, so that one of the network symbol would be there. But what about so that when a parent came into a room, they could tell immediately if their child was watching a program that had an adult rating or a violence guideline associated with it, rather than having to sit and watch programming for a few minutes to figure out what the kids were actually watching?
The icon was never sort of part of the original plan and was put forward by the industry as an interim step because there were some real technological difficulties in bringing the V-chip online. It was new technology, and in the national trial that we undertook, there were a number of bugs in the system that came to the fore. I think what's even better than keeping the icon up is that for programs that are intended for adult audiences, you'll find most broadcasters now are repeating viewer advisories when they come out of a commercial break, so that every time you come back to a program out of a commercial, very clear definition and a description of the content of the program, and provides a cautionary warning. And the broadcasters are very good about doing that.
Thank you.
Now we go to Mr. Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. McKay, for your expert testimony here today. Again, just by way of information from my colleagues, the topic that I had requested information from Mr. Cohen was on administrative monetary penalties. I've now forwarded that to the clerk. She will be translating, and it will be coming out in due course. And I would like to question about administrative monetary penalties of Mr. McKay. Are you familiar with them or that concept at all?
It's not something I have any expertise in, sir.
Okay, well, I don't have any expertise either, but I have a little wee tiny description that may help the two of us through this. My understanding of administrative monetary penalties is that what we were told by Mr. von Finkenstein when he was here was that he had a scalpel or he had a great big club, and he didn't have anything in between in terms of penalizing for or bringing some kind of action into force to be able to enforce these rules. And so we, in turn, for your information, Mr. McKay, have asked that the CRTC provide his ideas to us. And I guess my question is, we have now, as a result of my request for information from Mr. Cohen for his opinion, we have his perspective. I'd be interested in yours. In your judgment, if there was some conceivable way, and I don't think it's doable, but if there was some conceivable way to repair this bill and actually use it as a vehicle to get things like these penalties into effect, is that something that we should even be bothering with? Is it something that, in your judgment, would be desirable? Should the CRTC or any other regulatory or influencing body, should they have additional tools that perhaps would give monetary penalties to as tools in their toolkit of being able to handle these issues?
There is, I think, a monetary penalty that exists now, in the sense that broadcasters are required to adhere to the code as a condition of license. If they are members of the Broadcast Standards Council, that condition of license is suspended. But the way the Broadcast Standards Council worked, if I remember my operational manual from when I sat on the Ontario Regional Council, is if there are a number of infractions by a particular broadcaster, I think it's 3, that membership can be revoked, and then all complaints against that broadcaster are not dealt with by the council but are dealt with by the commission, and they go on the station's record, which is dealt with at the time of license renewal. And license renewal for a station television station, radio, is a major undertaking. It takes a lot of time. You usually have expensive legal help that is helping you put your story together that you take to the Commission. And if the Commission turns around and says, well, you haven't been very much of a good corporate citizen, we're only going to renew your license for maybe it'll be 2 years. Then you have to go through the whole process again. So that is a monetary penalty that does exist now, but it's not in the neighborhood of a fine, if I'm making myself clear.
Exactly, but that's the atomic bomb that destroys the station, I suppose.
I don't think it destroys the station because they still get their license renewed, but it's for a very short period of time, and they have to go through the whole process again in order to come back after 2 years, where normally a license is renewed for 5 or 7 years. And in the case of Schwa, they did not, and as a consequence lost their license. Is that correct? I believe so. I think that's correct. But I guess this is the point, is I'm asking for your opinion. I'm rather getting the impression that you're saying that the way things are right now vis-a-vis television, per se, which is what this bill exclusively deals with, that although there can always be improvements, but the fact of the matter is that this bill really doesn't do anything at all to get at what we all would desire to get at. This bill isn't an instrument to do it. I would agree with that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scarpellegia.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Stated the time limit this time, because...
how long is that?
I'll give you 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I don't need all of it, I don't think. But I guess what seems to be coming out of our discussions over this bill is media literacy is important, but it's really very much about educating adults. And you know, I remember when I was working with some anti-tobacco people during the time of anti-tobacco legislation. They were very skeptical of industry initiatives to discourage tobacco use. In fact, they were skeptical of government initiatives to discourage tobacco use because they found that it didn't work. It didn't work for various reasons, I guess, in terms of the companies because they didn't really take it that seriously. And in terms of governments, sometimes it was misguided. Good intentions. When you say, and I believe in your total good faith and expertise on this subject, but when we say to parents, just visit the website and educate yourself, as you said, it's parents don't have time, and basically you're saying to them, or not you, but the industry is saying to them, take a course in media literacy. And of course, as parents, they say, well, I know it's good for my kids. I don't really need to do that. So is there a way that you feel maybe the industry should be doing a little more outreach in terms of educating parents? For example, showing more at their own expense, of course, public service announcements, and not the kind of public service announcement that is a signal, to go to the kitchen for a cup of coffee because it's so amateurish, but really good, powerful public service announcements paid for by the industry. Yeah, sure, with a reference to a website somewhere, but really, powerful, dramatic public service announcements about, speak to your kids about violence on TV. Do you think we should, the regulators should be pushing a little harder on that?
We've done that in the past as an industry. The Canadian Association of Broadcasters in the 90s undertook 2 very major campaigns in terms of speak out against violence and violence in our communities. And there was very strong reaction to that, very positive reaction. And it was a partnership with Heritage Canada and a number of other government departments. It could be well timed for another one of those similar initiatives.
But maybe it should be more sort of a more continual, on a more continual basis. I don't know.
I mean, you talked for a second about parents having to take a course in media literacy. It's not necessarily a course. There are
I was just
there are places on various websites where there's little 10-point plans, very simple, printed off stick it on your refrigerator. Some of them are so simple. Some of them is if there's a computer in the house, keep it in a place where parents can keep an eye on it. They don't have to stand behind their kids all their time when they're on the line, but if it's squirreled away in the family room or a bedroom and they're younger children, you don't know what's happening. If the computer's in the kitchen or in a corner of the back
or
sunroom.
Here's a suggestion. Maybe the cable companies, when they send you their bill, they should just insert something about this. You know?
And Rogers has done that in the past. They've been a very good corporate citizen.
Okay.
Mr. Mallow?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mackay, for being with us. Ten years ago, you published your book on the V-chip. And my understanding from what you said earlier is that there hasn't really been a study on the use, on the application, and the effectiveness of V-chips. Is that what you stated in your opening remarks?
It wasn't my book. I wrote one chapter in a book that was published by somebody else. And but to respond to your question, no, we've not done any national surveys that I'm aware of about the use of V-chip in Canada. There have been some studies done in the States, funded by the Pew Research for Public Policy and the media. But there have not been any recent studies done, really, since the encoding for the V-chip was introduced in, I think it's 2001.
Est-ce qu'il y a des choses qui auraient dû être faites, et si oui, par qui?
The things that should have been done, and if so, by whom?
I think it's worthwhile doing, and I think an organization with the reputation of the Media Awareness Network would be a great place to start, but they would need financial support to make that happen. And perhaps the Heritage Department might wish to kick in, perhaps Health Canada might wish to kick in.
Je sais que par rapport au code, peut-être vous avez...
With regard to the code, I know you have a certain bias because you actually were one of the team that drafted it. But in your opinion, is that a code an adequate one? Does it respond to the public's needs? And is it sufficient with regard to limiting the amount of violence that young children watch?
I think it's very effective in terms of especially children's programming. It was one of the first codes of its kind in the world that put very severe limitations on the depiction of violence in children's programming.
Oui.
And I think it has played a major role. I mean, one of the things that sets this country apart is its children's programming, by its very nature, is very nonviolent. I think we have an enviable reputation around the world for the caliber of our children's programming. And if, again, you're looking for something proactive to do, the more funding there is to produce better children's programming, less reason to put on less better children's programming.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Okay, thank you. And with that, Mr. Mackay, thank you very much for attending today. Your knowledge is greatly appreciated by this committee.
Just glad to participate, Mr. Chairman, and if there's anything more that I can provide, I'm at your disposal.
Okay, thank you. And just before we adjourn, I will say that on our April 1st meeting, I think that's a meeting where just we won't have any witnesses that day. What I hope to do is to sit down, get direction of where we're going, where this committee is going to go. We'll get your. We're going to. Not that we. Yes, we. One of our witnesses today got caught in a train. Train went backwards instead of forwards, so I think in fairness, we can talk about that on April the 1st. So with that, I wish everyone a good 2 weeks of constituency work. Ms. Morani, very short, please.
Monsieur le Président, on pourrait
Mr. Chair, we could agree to meet with that person. It's unfortunate he was to meet with the CRTC representatives, and now he's had train problems.
I'm not saying that we're not going to meet with them. We'll decide, because there's been some other. We'll decide how many more witnesses we might want to see. There's been some other suggestions here today, so we'll deal with that. Yes, Mr. Boulanger, very short, please.
Well, Mr. Chairman, is there any way we could have either delegate this to a steering committee or have some sort of a conference call over the next 2 weeks so that we don't take a whole meeting on the 1st of April to determine? I mean, I think personally, unless we're going to have Mr. Caron and perhaps some kids, I'd be prepared to go to clause by clause. I'd love to have a commitment to see what the CRTC has to propose, and perhaps even deal with the bill in the first week we're back.
Well, that would be my understanding too when I'm talking about that first week when we're back. My thing is we get into some of these, it's not going to take very long to do some of this stuff, and it takes a long time. So my suggestion is everyone will get the various, Catherine will look after getting various materials to people over the 2 weeks, come back on the 2nd, and we'll decide where we're going. That's how I want to do. I want to be fair to Ms. Morani. She has said that the Bloc haven't had any of their witnesses here. I want to treat everyone fair. So on the 1st of April, we'll decide where we're going to go. We'll make sure that if we're going to have more witnesses, we'll do that. And if we have to, then we'll.
Mr. Chairman, you've said, I don't think you're sensing much disagreement that you want to accede to Madame Morani's desire to hear Monsieur Caron. Why don't we schedule him, if we can, for the first hour, and then take the second hour on April 1st to determine.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just so we don't lose any time, if in fact we're going to have Monsieur Caron here and we have an intention of bringing children as well, then we might as well have kids here on the same day. And then we can wrap it up the following, go to clause by clause.
Where we get the kids?
Find the kids. I'd love to hear them.
Can I bring my grandson?
Bring your grandson.
Okay. Then okay. Suggestion then, now that anything I had suggested is not going to happen. I looked at that. We have Mr. Caron here for the first part, and we have some kids.
To the clerk to arrange for that?
Yes.
Okay. Fair enough.
And we'll have to do that in if we get through clause by clause at the next meeting, then we'll talk future business, and that's what we're going to have to do. Mr. Sixay.
Chair, I'd just like to flag one other issue, that if we are going to look at this issue of administrative fines that the CRT has suggested, I think it would be appropriate that we ask broadcasters to come back and respond to that suggestion, given that it is a new idea, and I don't think we've had an opportunity to hear from people who would be directly affected by that. So I think that's another piece that if we're going to go and have that kind of proposal, we should have the ability for those folks to respond to it.
Yeah, if we're going to do that, we will arrange that on the 1st of April. We've got our yes, Ms. Moran.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, my understanding is that the first hour would be devoted to hearing Mr. Caron as well as children.
Ok, donc jeudi, on parlera d'autre chose, c'est bien ça?
On Thursday, we'll be dealing with other issues.
On Thursday, we'll probably be doing clause by clause. That we look after this bill next week. Meeting adjourned.